Okay, hello everybody and welcome back to your 7th Java tutorial. And in this tutorial, as I said before, we will be creating our very own text-based adventure game, and it's going to be really cool. And to start off this tutorial, we're going to have to learn one more thing before we really get into writing it. But in order to keep it interesting, we're going to actually write it, but we're still going to be learning. So that's kind of the best solution because it's a win-win. You learn and you get to write your cool game at the same time. So anyway, I just created this class called adventuregame.java, and you know how to create classes. Just go to new Java class and just name it whatever you want. And first thing we're going to do is create our main method just like any other program. So public static void main string args. And you should be getting relatively familiar with this, but it doesn't need to. You don't have to have it memorized yet, but it'll help if you memorize it because you do need this a lot. So anyway, also because we know beforehand that we're going to have to be getting quite a bit of input from the user because that's kind of the point of a game. We're going to import java.util.scanner. And in case you've forgotten, this is the class that allows us to get input from the user. Okay, so anyway, let's start writing this. So what I was thinking is the first thing we're probably going to want to do is to allow the player to input their name so that well, we can address them throughout the game. So we can say like, good job so and so. I hope you get what I mean. Anyway, so in order to do this, let's first of all initialize our scanner so that we can get input throughout the rest of the program. So let's say scanner in equals, whoops, oh my gosh, I don't know what just happened, equals new scanner system.in. Okay, so now we have our scanner. Also, what we want to do is we want to create a string that's going to hold the name of our player. So let's say string player. So that's going to hold the player name. Now let's just put in a quick well, let's just get the name of the player. So we're going to say we're going to say player equals in.next line. Okay, so in case you don't remember, we get the player variable and we set it equal to the scanner, and the next line is how you get text. So if we run this, we can put in our name, but here's the problem. If you weren't the one writing this, you would have really no idea what to do. You wouldn't even know if this program were working. So let's do something else. Let's put in an output statement before we get the input. So let's just say system.out.print please enter your name. Okay, so now let's run this, and we can put in our name, and it stores it. But another thing that can just make it look nice is if you add a colon and then a space. I think I might have talked about this before, but that'll just make it makes it look a bit nicer, and it makes it look proper. So anyway, now, well, theoretically we've stored the variable, but when you're programming, it's always good to just check to make sure everything's working if it's not really obvious that it's working. So let's just do system.out.print player. And so that should, in theory, print out whatever we put in the last line, and that'll tell us that it's working. So let's just put in my name, and it outputs it. So that's pretty good. Now we have the name of the player stored in the variable player. So this could be called at any point throughout the game, and we could use it to say stuff to them, or talk about them, or anything we want. But another thing that might be useful would be to get something such as a class that they've chosen. So what I was thinking is that we could have two classes, the warrior and the archer. So basically right now we're going to let the player choose which class they would like to select. Now there is one way we could do this. So first thing we're going to do is we're just going to say system.out.print type 1 for warrior and 2 for archer. Okay, so why did I do that? Well, if you think about it, we could have just said like type in warrior or archer, but then the thing is the player has to type it with the exact same case and everything as we as we ask for it. So, and that can just be annoying, especially when like you're trying to go through something, you have to keep typing things. Sometimes it's easier just to use something short and quick like 1 or 2, and it has the same effect. They're still choosing the same thing. It's just a little bit faster for the user, and it's quicker for us to program too. So anyway, what do we want to do with this? Well, because we're using 1 or 2, what we can do is we can create an integer to hold these. So let's do that. So int class. Wait, this doesn't work. Well, why doesn't this work? Essentially, Java has a bunch of these built-in functions, or things that it can use, I should say, as do most programming languages. So class is one of those things. So for example, int, anything that shows up in purple, like int, is something that Java already has in it. So for example, we couldn't say int double, as in trying to call this integer double, because double is something that already exists. It's a type of variable. Whoops. So we can't use that, but we could say doubles because that doesn't exist. So instead of saying class, let's just say class selection. Okay. So that should work fine. So now let's just get this. So we're going to say class selection equals in.next int. And remember, you have to use next int because we're trying to get an int. Okay, so now here's what we can do. We could just put in an if loop saying, for example, you put in a 1 or 2. But there's another way we can do this, and it's using different methods. Now, we haven't done much with this before, but this is the part I said we'll be learning in this tutorial. So right now we have a public static void main string args. Okay, well, it's just called the main method. And essentially, this is the thing that Java looks for when it first starts any program. It looks for the main method. And this is where we call everything else and create most of our stuff. But we can also create our own methods that we can reference throughout our program. And it just keeps stuff more organized and efficient, and it allows us to continuously call it throughout the use of the program. So, how do we create another method? So first thing we're going to do is we're going to do public static. So what does this do? Well, public means that it can be accessed from essentially anywhere. Also, we could access it from separate classes if we wanted to. Static essentially means that it's a non-changing method. We'll get into this later, but just remember, you usually need static if you're going to be referencing it. And then in the main method we used void. Now, why did we use void? Well, essentially this is your return type. Now, what is a return type? Well, let's just make this quickly. So let's say int warrior. And let me explain what exactly this does. So essentially the way this works is we can call this method by saying warrior. And then, so let me just create int test. Okay, so what we can do is we can say test equals warrior, and because we haven't passed in anything, this will work. And this still has an error. So why is that? Because essentially the way a method works is, right now we can say test equals warrior. That's not doing anything because warrior doesn't have anything in it. And whenever you create a method with a return type, such as int, you have to return something. So let's just say return 5. And now there's no more error. So what does this do? Well, it sets test equal to warrior, which is being called, and that's what is signified by the parentheses. It's calling the method. So what this does is it goes to warrior, and it goes in here, and it knows that it's looking for an integer. So we go down, we return an integer. So now what it does is it's basically set this equal to the return type. That's the whole point of a method, really, is whatever you return is what's going to get used when you call it. But here's the thing. This in itself is not that useful. What's more useful is if we can put in something apply some sort of function or method to it and then return something else after having changed or modified the data in some way that we would like. So let's do that, and there is a way to do that. So what we can do in these parentheses here, we can put in something such as int a. So what does this do now? Well, now it says when we say public static int, that means we're going to be returning an integer, and then anything inside the parentheses is going to be whatever you have to put in order to call this method. So let's put in a 5 here. So what does this do? Well, essentially, let's forget about the test equals and let's just say warrior 5. So what this does, first of all, it goes into its class and it finds the warrior method. Now, it knows that we're going to be returning an int, so we have done that down here. What the 5 does is it goes into the parentheses and it sets whatever is here, so int a in this case, equal to whatever we've put in. But what happens if we put in boolean? Well, as you can see, that doesn't work because we have called it using 5, which is an integer, or I think it could potentially be used for double, but we can't put that in as a true or false, which is what a boolean is. So we try to put in a 5, but it can't set a boolean a equal to 5, so that doesn't work. So that's why we're going to keep it with an int, so int a. So now what it does is it sets int a equal to 5. So now you can use whatever you've put in here from this method, in here. So let's do that. So let's say a equals a plus 2. Now, returning a 5 is not really going to be that useful because then we could just use 5 in our program. But if we return a, now we can run this program and we can enter this. Now, so right now none of this is doing anything because we haven't printed anything. So let's create another output statement. So let's say system.out.print test. Okay, so what's this going to do? So first we created the variable test. Now here we set it equal to warrior with a 5 as the input. So what that does is it goes and it finds the warrior method, which is down here, and it puts 5 in. Because 5 is in the parentheses here, it puts it into the parentheses here as an integer a. So then we go into here and we have a equals a plus 2. So for example in this we do 5, or a equals 5 plus 2. So that's a is going to equal 7. So it should return a 7. Now we go back up here and it changes this whole thing equal to whatever the return type was. And then it sets test equal to the return, which was 7. So now we have test equals 7. So now it's going to print out a 7. So let's try this and make sure it works. Let's put in anything and it returns a 7, just like we had hoped. Now, this may seem a little bit confusing, and you may not really see how this is going to be useful at all writing our game, but I assure you it is. So let me just quickly give you an example. So essentially what we're doing is we have class selection, and so let's just create a new string and we're going to call it player class. So this is going to give us a text-based version of whatever we've set as the class for the player. So now let's call this method, and rather than sending out an integer because that's not that useful, let's change this to public static string. Okay, so what can we do with this? Well, now what we could potentially do is we could call this and put in a number 1 or 2 and then have it return a string as warrior or archer, which is kind of a little bit more useful than the way we have it right now. So let's do this. So what we can do is we can say player class equals warrior, and then we need to put in something here. Well, we know we have to put in the 1 or 2, and it's whichever one the player inputted, and we used class selection as the variable. So that's that 1 or 2. So let's put in class selection here. Class selection. Okay. So now it puts in class selection as A. Now we don't want to just change it, so let's get rid of this. Now inside of this loop, and guys, we're going to ignore this error for now because I'll explain that in a sec. Let's create an if statement, and we'll say if A is equal to 1, then it's warrior. If A is equal to 2, archer. So let's do that. So if A equals 1, return. Now return. Now inside here, what we can do is we can return whatever we want, and then we could also say else if A equals 2, return something else. Now here's the thing about methods. You can return as long as you're returning the type, you can return anything, and you can have multiple return statements as long as there isn't a possibility of them running at the same time. So for example, in this program, there is no possibility that A could be equal to both 1 and 2 simultaneously. So therefore this is allowed. But we couldn't also put this here because this is returning A when it has already, if A equals 1, it's going to be returning this and also this. So that doesn't work, so we'd have to take that out anyway. Now the reason that wasn't working before was because A is an integer and we're asking for it to return a string. So that one, return A, was not going to work anyway. So, but here's the thing. This also has an error, and because we're asking for this string. But if we take this out, well, there's another error. Why is that? Because even though this works, because there's no possibility to have it be both A equaling 1 and 2 at the same time, there is a possibility that it could be neither of them. So therefore, this does not guarantee that we're going to have a return, because it might not manage to pass either of these, in which case it would have nothing to do, and that would cause a serious problem. So you always have to return something, but you can have multiple returns depending on what happens, but there has to be at least one that is guaranteed to run. So what we could do is we could put in an else statement, say else return, and then we're just going to keep these blank for now. So now it gets rid of that error, because now it could be equal to 1, it could be equal to 2, or it'll just return nothing. But there is a bit of a faster way we could do this, because we can take out the else. Now you may be thinking, well, doesn't this cause an error, because it could be 1, but it would still run this? Well, the answer is no, because here's the way it works. It comes in, and let's say A is equal to 2. It comes into this loop, it puts in a 2 for A, and it checks if A is equal to 1. Well, that's not true, so it moves on to the else. If A is equal to 2, that's true, so it goes into this loop and it returns whatever is in there, but then it stops. After it returns something, a method will not continue running. So once it returns anything, it'll stop running, so it'll never reach this if either of these is true. So that's why we don't even need to worry about the else. So that's kind of just a neat, efficient way to do things, and I'm not quite sure why everything turned gray, but we'll ignore it for now. Anyway, so now, we said if A is equal to 1, we'll return warrior, and if A is equal to 2, we'll return archer, and else return, please enter a valid number. Okay, so now what happens is we enter our name, and we enter a 1 or 2, but it doesn't do anything yet because we've set player class, the string, equal to warrior or archer, but we haven't really got anything to do with that. So let's just print that out. Let's say sim.out.print you have selected, and then let's put in our plus just to concatenate, in case you've forgotten, all of the text, and let's say player class. So now what happens when we run this is we're going to say our name, and 1, you've selected a warrior, and 2, you've selected archer, and 3, please enter a valid number. Now, as you can see, there's a minor bug, because no matter what, it's going to say you have selected and then player class, which is this. But for now, we're going to ignore this. Now, this video is getting pretty long, so I'm just going to quickly review everything that we've done, and I'll go over how this method works. And then in the next video, we'll go into a little bit more depth. So anyway, first of all, we get the name, and we set that equal to the string player. Then what we do is we come down here, and we get class selection, which is an integer. And so we put that in, and that's going to be either a 1 or 2, hopefully. Now what it does is it goes down here and it takes this string player class and it sets it equal to warrior, which is down here, and then inside the parentheses it's putting in class selection. So it goes down to warrior and it sees, oh, we have something in warrior's parentheses, so clearly it's inputting something. So then it goes up here to figure out what that is. So that thing that it's putting in is class selection, which is here. So that was the 1 or 2. So it puts in a 1 or 2 for int a. Now, what it does is it goes through and it manipulates the data, and it sees, oh, the type of the method, so the method type is returning a string, or it has to return a string. So we have to go through and we have to return a string. After we do that, we take that string, and essentially this whole thing is now equal to whatever we have returned. And now that is usable as data because we've set it as another variable inside here, so now we can just use this. So that's essentially how a method works, very simply. It makes programs much more efficient, and it makes it easier to use them, and it also makes it easier for multiple people to work on programs, though that comes in when you try to use multiple classes. Then it's very easy for many people to work on a program. And so anyway, in the next video we'll continue working on this, we'll improve it a little bit, and then we're going to start going into how to use multiple classes in a single program to make something a little bit more interesting. So anyway, thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed, please leave a like and subscribe, and also share the video, because that's kind of the most helpful thing for me. Because I really appreciate it if you share the video with other people. If you leave a comment, I respond to every single comment, so feel free to do so. Again, thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.